Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Peach Slap Wash Processed Ethiopia from Doc Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And Doc, based out of Amsterdam, Netherlands. They're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, but the first time I heard about this coffee was when ScoutRush.com commented on our Deterra review, saying that they were drinking this coffee while watching that review. So I went to Doc's website to take a look at this coffee, only to find it at a local coffee shop just a couple of days later. I said, hey, we haven't reviewed too many wash processed Ethiopian coffees this year, and this one sounds very much like my type of wash processed Ethiopian. So I figured we'd go ahead and pull the trigger and review this one. So that's where things left us. So let's just go ahead and see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 40. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. So even though this one is a filter roast, I've had some very interesting experiences with Doc in general. As the first time I ever tried them, I found their coffees to be surprisingly more developed than I was expecting. And then since then, I've had some coffees from them that were extremely light, even lighter than some of the very light roasting coffee roasters in Europe. This one, obviously somewhere in the middle, as I found this one to maybe not be quite as light as I might have expected, given some of the past experiences, but it's still, I would say, on the more moderately light side of things. If anything else, I could say that it has maybe a slight more development for a lighter profiled coffee. Hopefully that gives you a good idea. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup was pretty typical wash processed Ethiopian forward, as it offered a cleaner, soft fruit forward cup, with the focus being on plenty of the peachiness, which is exactly what I was looking for this coffee. In addition to that, a slight citrus as well as tea-like savoriness to it, a pretty refreshing peach forward cup, so it was a very nice start. The notes that they have listed on here, everything present, everything notable, everything abundant, but most specifically the peachiness from it. So I was very happy with this first try. We move on to day 18 as we opted for the Chemex, and the cup continues to remain very peach tea forward, as it's very sweet, very clean, very peachy, all in line with a lot of the expectations you would have for a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. Lighter bodied, soft, very nice, and that's a lot of the reason why I don't necessarily enjoy reviewing wash processed Ethiopian coffees, because oftentimes they are just very straightforward. This was extremely straightforward. Didn't need to think too hard or try too hard on this one, because everything was just very well defined and pronounced within this cup. Day 21, opted for the April Brewer, and this is the first time the cup changed a fair bit, as it leaned more heavily into the tea-like attributes, to the extent where the peach and citric qualities were notably more toned down. Rest of the cup is much more in line with the citric components at the end and in the finish, so something a little bit different on this day. We move on to day 24 as we opted for the V60 with Doc's recipe, and Doc definitely likes pushing their coffees as we have higher extraction adjustments to it, much higher temperatures, and it was closer to being back to the first impression off brew, but after that the citric forward profile of this one really seemed to dominate, and interestingly enough I was even getting a slight bit of graininess to it as well. It did open up as it cools, as the peachiness was present yet again, but not to the same extent as our first couple of tries, with the savory black tea continuing to skew a little bit more heavily within this cup. Day 27 through the Chemex with Doc's recipe, and it is also closer to the initial impression with much more of the peachiness and slightly more sugariness in a slightly sweeter cup today. Nice clarity, lower body, plenty of citrus, a refreshing finish, enjoyable day. The notes, as far as the flavor profiles in this coffee, are very consistent, as this coffee, once again, very, very straightforward. The only thing that seems to change is which profile of this coffee is a little bit more dominant, as I found the citrus as well as the savoriness of the tea-like aspects to be at times a little bit more pronounced. Sweetness seems to be fluctuating, as the adjustments we've made in this coffee seem to really highlight and emphasize other aspects of this coffee, and they weren't necessarily highlighting the aspect that I was looking for the most, which of course was the peachiness. Day 30, back to the V60 with our standard recipe, and everything just kind of came full circle. At first, you have a very successful result and you just continue to try adjusting to make it better, and you just end up going back to that same first impression. That's exactly what happened here, as it was wonderfully peach forward yet again, with an Arnold Palmer-like sense to it. Slight citrus, savory black tea, sweeter peach, clean, lighter bodied coffee, very refreshing finish, very enjoyable. And once again, I was like, okay, we wasted a couple of days trying to tinker with this one, but that's the point of these reviews, to get a little bit more experience and see what else you can get from this coffee. Day 33 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and while the cup is very nice, it was not necessarily offering the same peach forward aspect of the V60 cup. Otherwise, still dominated by that refreshing peach quality to it in a fresher sense, as well as the Arnold Palmer feel, with a complementary citrus and plenty of the tea-like savoriness. So an enjoyable cup nonetheless, just maybe not to the same extent as the V60, which is why on day 36 we opted to go through the V60 one more time with our standard recipe. And once again, for the third time, cup seems to be extremely straightforward, with the peachiness really dominating it as the most pronounced component to it. Very straightforward, savory tea, citrus, lighter bodied cup of coffee, repetitive notes in that sense. And I feel like if we would have just gone 8 days with the exact same recipe, then I would have said, okay, this coffee is just exactly what you're looking for a wash processed Ethiopian coffee that promises a very peach forward cup. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have 4 level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the cleanliness level 4. I don't necessarily have too much to say on that. It's a very clean cup of coffee. Higher side of the level 4, peachiness is very well defined. If there's maybe something that's slightly taken away from it, it's the fact that the tea-like aspects of it were also, we'll just say, very pronounced. So that slightly took away from the peachiness of the coffee, but outside of that, I mean, it's a very, very clean coffee. We're working with a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, lighter profiled wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. Always expected it to minimum score that level 4 mark. It would have been something remarkable to have it score that level 5, but very, very clean cup. Finish, level 4. And I have to say that outside of the peachiness, which is obviously my favorite part of this coffee, the finish in this coffee was maybe one of the better aspects of it, because I don't always have the best experiences when it comes to Dog's coffees, especially their more processed coffees. But something like this that had a very sugary and even sugary peach finish to this one, I really enjoyed that part, and it was my second favorite part of this coffee, second most enjoyable part of this coffee for me, as I found the finish to be both peachy as well as sugary. So really enjoyed that aspect of this one, and it had a fun kind of refreshing sense to it. So a lot of positives to say on that note specifically. Sweetness, level 4, just discussed that. It came in a sugary sense as well as in that peach-like sense, and that's always going to be a big selling point to me. Scoring a level 4 in that regard is something that I'm very much going to enjoy from a coffee like this. Stone fruit, level 4, and I think the only reason it doesn't score higher is because I've had peachier coffees, I suppose. Obviously, Lady Bermudas exists, and there are some even wash-processed Ethiopian coffees that may have been a little bit more intense in that regard. This one, though, definitely on the higher side of level 4, and oftentimes, if maybe a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee has at least a little bit more depth to it, then it can take away from maybe a one-note peachy coffee, which I feel like might have been the case with this one, because there's just a little bit more to it than just straight peach. So level 4 feels like the best place to put that. Let's move on to a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity, level 3. I mean, wash-processed Ethiopian coffees, I don't think you're always going to have the most bright coffees out there. It kind of depends on how it's roasted or who's roasting it. But in this case, it was a little bit more at a medium level, as there was a little bit more brightness to it. But given that it's skewed in a much more fruit-forward sense to it as opposed to a brighter sense, I feel like level 3 was a better place to put it. Florality, level 3, and that is an interesting part. The second most common characteristic, and oftentimes maybe even the most common characteristic for a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, is florality. And I can say that there may be some soft white floral aspects to this one, but they're nowhere near as pronounced as even the citric-like quality to it. So it's at the level 3 mark, but I feel like it was on the lower side of level 3, and maybe something I might have expected a little bit more from, but given it wasn't a note on here, I don't think that it's something that they were either trying to get more of or something that they even felt was overly apt for this coffee. Citrus fruit, level 3, And I think that they actually describe this coffee as something like a peach lemonade, and that makes a lot of sense because I think that it's just so much more sugary in that regard, and I can feel a fair bit of citrus very much in that lemon-like sense. So I really enjoyed that part of this coffee, and I can see a peach lemonade attribute to this one, like a peach Arnold Palmer, a peach Snapple, those sort of things. Yeah, actually it's very well done in that sense. So citrus definitely feels apt at that level 3 mark, as does the savoriness, because there is a wonderful bit of black tea-like aspects to this coffee. So those 3 things are the most pronounced characteristics, and they all go very well together in what you would hope for from a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. So having that stone fruit there at the level 3, or correction, level 4, higher side of level 4, and the other things at that level 3, also on the higher side of level 3, kind of marries all of the components of this coffee together pretty well. Final thing worth discussing in this tasting wheel is the body at a level 1, as this has a very light body to it. And interestingly enough, given we haven't reviewed too many wash processed Ethiopian coffees this year, it's always nice to kind of see something score that very low level 1, because it has that tea-like body. At least I oftentimes enjoy the tea-like body of these types of coffees. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one actually is probably my favorite Doc coffee that we've ever reviewed. And outside of the coffees that we've reviewed from Doc, I've actually drank a huge number of their coffees, as there are so many coffee roasters, not just in the area, but all over the United States, that continues to seem to offer Doc's coffee. So they're actually extremely accessible to so many people, and as a result, they've been extremely accessible to us, and I've just drank so many of their coffees, and I can say that this one's the most enjoyable one I think that I've ever had. Milky Cake's kind of interesting, but this one's a little bit more traditional of the type of coffee that I do enjoy, which is a very peach-forward, wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. Scores very high in the marks that I'm looking for: cleanliness, sweetness, a fruit profile, especially one that's used in the direction that I'm looking for. And while the florals may not have necessarily been in the direction or the, I will say, abundance that I'm hoping for, there's still enough from the other aspects that made up for it, and they were all a little bit more pronounced in a sugary sense, and I just found this to be a very enjoyable wash-processed Ethiopian coffee. So it was nice to kind of go back and try one of these, given that we'll probably have more of them here in the near future, but this sets a nice little benchmark for enjoyable wash-processed Ethiopian coffees to kind of start the year with them. I think for the most part, type of person I would actually suggest this coffee to, and that makes it a very easy suggestion and recommendation. It's for anybody that does enjoy their very clean, lighter-bodied, peach-forward Ethiopian coffees, because that's my type of coffee, especially as far as washed Ethiopian coffees go. Those are the ones I look for the most, specifically peachiness or florality. And given that this one's skewed so heavily in that peachy direction, anybody that enjoys their really peachy, clean Ethiopian coffees, this one's a great suggestion and recommendation for you. And it's also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Peach Slap Wash Processed Ethiopia from Doc Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.